Hey, welcome back to the NOTCAST. It's number 319. Today is Tuesday, 26th September 2023. I've got some new kit, and so I'm trying it out, is how it's working. So I'm deciding I'm going to be recording with an external microphone, see how that works. And if I like how that works, then I'm going to get something a bit more professional. I've also got one of those weird light things that makes you look better lit. Because I looked at the one which I did yesterday, and I thought just having one light source that's poking all the way down doesn't look particularly good. Quite why it's taken me 3 years to work that out, I don't know. But there we are. Obviously, I think today is something like the 3rd anniversary of the first one of these. Not that any of you are paying much attention. The world 3 years ago was extremely very different indeed. And at some point, I guess I'm going to have to talk about that. But right now, I'm not. I'm going to be talking about what was one of my favourite bands. Now, perhaps not quite so much, um, largely because they haven't done a huge amount over the past few years. Um, Although they have released 7 studio albums, they've all been soundtrack albums, actually. And there's been 7 soundtrack albums and a live release, and 3 or so singles. So the band, as you can probably tell from my t-shirt and from the episode title, I am nothing if not thorough, are Matt Johnson in his band format configuration, and that's been a pretty. I think the word exciting is probably grossly overstating it, but it has been a good few years actually to be a The fan compared to some of the other years which we have had. So we have had, respectfully, the soundtrack album to Tony, Moonbug, Hyena, the Inertia Variations 3-album set, the soundtrack to Muscle, the comeback special, and the singles We Can't Stop What's Coming, I Want to Be You, and $1, One Vote, which you can look at and go, actually, that's a pretty poor harvest for 18 years. I agree. Or more correctly, 23 years actually, since there was last a studio album of new The songs. But lots of stuff has happened in the meantime. And so, from my perspective at least, I think a shroud fell over in 2002 after the Meltdown shows. I mean, if David Bowie was to ring you up and go, I want you to record and perform your songs, I'd be there and I'd ping out my guitar and I'd go, okay, David, whatever you say, because you're David bloody Bowie. You say jump, I'll go how high. But after that, the effectively retreated from the public eye. I think if you're somebody who's been obsessed with music, and I'm obsessed with music, as you've already worked out. Music is like my preferred form of art, is my preferred form of expression. It's the thing that connects to me most immediately and quickly, more than anything else on the planet, is music. It can, a film can take a couple of hours to rock my world. A song can do it in 4.5 minutes. Unless, of course, you're the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man scene in Ghostbusters, which is over in 2 minutes 58 seconds. But if David Bowie was to ring me up and go, Mark, can you sing a song? You know what I'd do? I'd do it. Yeah, I can't say that I'd be hesitant about it. I pick up this trusty guitar because I'm having a midlife crisis now. I've got an acoustic guitar. This is going to sound awful because I haven't played it for a while. See what I mean? And I'll be there. I'll sing Love is Stronger Than Death for you, David, whatever you want. But since he's never going to ring me, and so for there, then you can kind of go, well, after Meltdown, it's understandable, actually, that Matt kind of withdrew from music for a number of reasons. I think the industry, as Hunter S. Thompson once said, there's like a crooked nest of vipers. And there is unfortunately also a downside, which kind of indicates just how venal some industries are. I think it's fair to say, if you've been working in any industry for a number of years, you want to be treated with dignity and respect. You want to be treated honestly. You want people to be straightforward with you. You want to be paid what you feel that you're owed and to be paid fairly for it. And you want to be able to surround your working life with people commercially that you trust. And if you've been working in an industry for 20 years, that's completely understandable. And I think there was a point where he just kind of lost faith in the music industry. I think that the record company, Sony, who I'm not a fan of, by the way, had the view that, well, he's an artist, and artists are stupid and they don't understand business, and we can rip them off left, right, and centre, and you end up with people that are being treated by the industry as if they should be lucky to be able to work and get paid a pittance just to play a guitar. And it's like, well, no, that's not fair. And if you treat your artists with dignity and respect, they'll and pay them fairly, they'll normally keep working. It's when financially they can't make it work that they stop, and then people go, "Oh, band split," and it's like, well, they split because the industry is often full of shitty people that rip off other people and aren't respectful about it. So I think, as my mother used to say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I think at a certain point, having made 7 or 8 studio albums and having sold millions of records, was kind of going, well, I've been doing this for a really long time, and where's my financial security in this? Where's my payoff in that? Because there comes a time when you kind of go, you can't get into a situation where effectively you're paying to play. Which is effectively kind of what happens. I think Matt's accountant said in the year 2000, I don't know why you just don't give everybody that comes in £10, because that's how much money you're losing at a show, like £1,000 a day or something. And you kind of go, well, don't tour then. And I think Matt put his guitar down in 2003, and he didn't pick it up again until 2010. There was no deal. He wasn't signed to anybody. He had no band. And when you're in a situation like that, if you've got any degree of performance anxiety around the work that you're doing, if you've got any degree of hesitancy around what it's doing, and you haven't got a compelling reason to do it, sometimes you can kind of just procrastinate your way out of a career. I mean, effectively, I think between 2003 and 2010, to me, the became effectively redundant. So people like me who were buying the records, we relatively faithful to the band, remember them and go, well, I wish they were still doing something, but they aren't doing anything, so what are we going to do? And then you end up in a situation where the band haven't done anything for 10, 20 years, and you end up kind of going, well, life's moved on, and I know you as artists have moved on, but the world has moved on. And to think that you can just pick it back up where it once belonged, like come back through the door after 20 years, just go, ta-da, I'm back, bitches, and not expect people to be like, well, we've been doing our own thing. Like, you've been doing your own thing. You can't just walk back in and pick up where you've left off. So, from as I understand it, and I could be wrong, Matt moved into changing how he generated money. So took the last bits of money that he had and bought a building in London, owned it, rented out most of the building as artist studios and commercial spaces, used the top floor himself as effectively the others' headquarters, split his time between being effectively a landlord and being a musician and an artist, and spent the time being a landlord to subsidise not getting a day job, so to speak. And apparently he reclaimed 2 floors in the building to live in and base the other in, and then used that income from an advert for, I think he licensed This Is the Day for £125,000 to build his own studio, and effectively became completely self-contained, self-managing, his own man, answerable to no one, with an independent revenue stream from the building. And it was very, very quiet between 2003 and 2007. There was one song that was released. It was a download only. It later appeared on the B-side of a single called $1, One Vote, the most recent the release. And that single was called Mrs. Mac in 2007. And it's a strange song, Mrs. Mac. To me, Mrs. Mac is a song about effectively a woman teacher in his school. If you want to go back in time, think about the people that are teachers in your schools, and you kind of like, you always remember who's the bad teacher, who's the good teacher, who's the teacher that you would actually want to talk to, and who's the teacher that you would cross the road to avoid. I have teachers like that. I have teachers that who treated me like an adult. and I have teachers who treated me like meat. And the ones that are in the latter category, I literally wouldn't piss on them if they were on fire. Since I'm never going to bump into them being on fire, and I don't need a wee, that's not going to be the option. But Mrs. Mac was one of those songs about how the childhood experiences that you have feed into who you are as an adult. And you think about the childhood experiences that you've had or I've had, and we kind of think about the way in which we were treated by our parents or our teachers or our siblings or whoever, and then you kind of go, well, what are you going to, how's that going to influence you as a person, as an adult? What are you going to do? And then you're going to end up singing a song where you go, love, 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 love is stronger than death. There you go. You've made 319 episodes of this before I've sung at you, and I'm probably not going to do it again, at least not until I learn how to play the guitar. It was a strange time as well, 2003 to 2010. My life changed completely. 2003, I was living in a rented flat in London, and by the time 2010 came around, I had got a mortgage. I'd become a father to two children. I was in a long-term relationship, and things had changed dramatically and completely over that time. And if you're an artist, to expect your audience not to change over that time is pretty strange, really. I always think of I can't remember who it was, they described kind of, I think, Michelangelo's David. They said their life was like Michelangelo's David. You just chip away at all the bits that don't look like you until they do look like you. And then that's how you know who you are. Obviously, I'm not, if I was a work of art, I'd probably be Picasso's Guernica as opposed to anything else. But from a realistic kind of perspective, Matt Johnson effectively became the curator of his own legacy. He moved into archaeology, so he used the time after he had created this space to retrieve and preserve the body of work that he created previously. So found his old tapes, baked them in the oven, found a tape player, digitized them, fed them into a machine, went back and effectively curated all those random DATs and mini discs and reel-to-reel and Ampex tapes that he had that have been lying around over the decades in his various storages and lockups. I went, right, now I'm going to effectively transfer them once and for all into whatever it is that they're going to be in a format that's durable for the rest of time. Which was probably where the official bootleg series started a few years ago, with his recordings of the Gadgets or the album See Without Being Seen, which I've mentioned way back in the first episode. And those were the places where he started, and obviously he was able to re-release those because he wasn't signed under a contract at that point. But 2010 was where we had the first kind of album released by the new configuration of the which exists to this day, which is effectively Matt Johnson on his own in his studio, writing and recording largely instrumental soundtrack work. So the first release which we had in 2010 was a soundtrack for a film called Tony. I have seen this film. It is glum and miserable, and it's like being punched in the face repeatedly for 100 minutes. About a serial killer in London in the late 2000s. It reflects, I think, a lot of the things that are my experience of the world I live in. Now, as I've mentioned before, when you see a film that's set in Chicago or something, you kind of go, that's Chicago, that's not the world I live in. If you see a film that's set in London, you kind of go, that's the world I recognise, that's the world I live in. And so Tony, as the soundtrack, is the soundtrack to a film by his brother Gerard. And it comes in this attractive book pack, which features 32 different pieces in there, which are, I think, probably 24 instrumentals and 8 dialogue pieces from the film. And there's an accompanying essay there. There's photographs of brutalist London architecture. That's Barbican. Yeah, that is. And again, rooms and corridors and examples of urban life that you will have had. Oh, look, a toilet. I don't think I've seen one of those for a few hours. and then there is yeah, photographs from art exhibitions, and just take them walking around London. This one here, by the way, One Nation Under CCTV, that is a Banksy, and One Place I Worked, that was painted on the wall of one place I worked once, and I think they wanted to paint over it the next day. I seem to remember there were some conversations where going, look, that's a Banksy. You don't just paint over it. It's not mindless vandalism. It's something that's perhaps a little bit more meaningful and better than that, it's fair to say. So that is One Nation Under CCTV, and I think that's probably a Vivienne Westwood's or Sex Pistols punk exhibition thing. And so what you've got is the this kind of dank, somewhat grotty version of London, because there are two Londons. There is a London that is rich and shiny, and it's populated by oligarchs and conservative MPs and businessmen, and then there's the version that you can find very, very easily, where there isn't very much money. It's very easy to be poor very, very quickly. Rampant poverty, living side by side with abject excess, and that's the London which I recognise. And it's very easy to slip from one into the other. You can quite literally just cross a road, and suddenly you're in somewhere that isn't a council flat, but is actually worth £4 million or something. And Tony as a film is, I think, a difficult film to watch. It reminds me of a kind of like a British noughties version of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, with the serial killer himself being, frankly, not a bright man in so much as he hasn't got an outstanding personality, not vastly interesting, a bit boring, a bit dull, a bit tedious. The kind of guy that if you talk to at a party or like an office party, a Christmas party, you'd be like, I'll talk to you for 30 seconds because I'm polite and then I'm going to go. Also, of course, following the cardinal rule of murderers, a moustache. And as we know, you can tell if someone's got a moustache, they're generally a wrong-going because, think Hitler, Stalin, Tony, my dad, those type of things. Now, I'm being flippant, but what is life if not a little bit of flippancy? And so that is the soundtrack to Tony, which came out in 2010. This is, I think, the blueprint for what that I have been doing over the past 13 years. It's instrumental. It's created in an area of no pressure. There's no expectations around any commercial or financial or profile linked outcomes around it. It's making music in a self-contained small industry, and it's a one-man army effectively, and Matt Johnson just doing whatever it is that he needs to do. A lot of the instrumental material, by the way, is really good if you like that type of thing. Very reminiscent of a lot of the instrumental material that you've got on B-sides, so Scenes from Arctic Twilight, things like Harbour Lights, Sleeping Gypsies, themes from Night Watchman, Fruit of the Heart, those type of songs that you wouldn't necessarily kind of pick out and go, that's it, that's the song, but very clearly also part of the palette. And I think for Matt, at least, probably the idea that creating material itself isn't actually that difficult. It's finding the song in the heart of that, refining the song through to something which is presentable and something which is memorable. And not everybody can do that. The world is full of gazillions of instrumental demos by bands that you know and love that you've never heard because they never found a melody or a vocal that really kind of like leapt out from that particular song, for example. And sometimes you'll come back to it later on and you'll go, I've got it now, I've found my way in. I mean, for me, I write something probably every 2 weeks. It's not difficult for me. I understand that it is more difficult for some people than it is for others. And there's also the element of what would be the point of doing it if it couldn't be as good as the best thing you've ever done? And that's when you kind of think about the statement from Oliver Stone, which is great is the enemy of good. Which is, if you do something that's good, sometimes that's good enough. Great, it doesn't have to be great. Not every song needs to be an epic or a world changer or a life changer. Sometimes you can just go, well, that's a pretty good song, actually. And that's good enough, really, I think. The second release that came out in 2011, second soundtrack, was a soundtrack to a film called Moonbug. I'd love to see Moonbug. I can't see Moonbug. I can't find it anywhere. I've looked for it. I can't find it. it's a really interesting kind of concept. It's a documentary. Again, we have 17 instrumentals here in Moonbug, and the concept and the theme behind Moonbug is around people that have walked on the moon. Yeah, we went to the moon, bitches. I know you don't believe it, but we did. And this is kind of looking at it from a kind of like 50-year remove, going, well, mankind is stepping back from having gone to the moon 40 something years ago, retreating from the edge in much the same way, for example, the Concorde or the Vulcan or some other technological marvels which we've had don't exist or can't exist anymore because they're simply too expensive. One of the reasons that mankind has not gone to the moon is because we can't afford it, and society and economies don't have the infrastructure to support that in any substantial way. If you want to think about a supply chain that exists inside films like Star Wars, for example, you then start to go, my God, the Death Star's got to have a HR department. It's got to have, it's got to have like waste and recycling. And even though it's we're a star, we do death, we blow things up. I kind of go, yeah, but do you get annual leave on the Death Star? If you've got annual leave on the Death Star, how long are you on holiday? Where'd you go? Do you have a recreation deck? Do you have a bar band with Max Rebo in it on the Death Star? Who knows? Moonbug is a film that's about what happened to the men after they stood on the moon. What are their thoughts? What are their feelings? What's their place in history? How do they regard themselves? And it's really, really difficult to find this film. I'd love to see it. And there's something that's actually very telling about the nature of this film and a lot of the films which Matt scored, which is that they are, by their very definition, transient. They're difficult to watch. They're harder to watch than average films. It's not like you can go and buy the DVD or find the DVD anywhere. If the film's not available anywhere and it's not streaming and you can't watch it, effectively it doesn't exist. And then you can kind of end up going, is that the best thing that can happen for someone to put all this work into something, into a work of art or a document of history, and then if the document ceases to exist, does the history cease to exist? These are the kind of things which keep me awake at night. Is if a hard-on falls down in a forest and no one's there to hear it, did it ever exist? And other cliches, for example. So Moonbug is an interesting instrumental album. It's got 17 instrumental songs. That's the last foot that was on the moon, by the way. The last foot, which belongs to Gene Cernan, the last foot on the moon. And I think Gene's dead now, actually, because obviously this film was shot at the end of people's lives. And one of the curious things about a lot of history is that it's recorded and documented, and if it isn't, it's gone forever. It's like extinct. Extinction is forever. When you think about BBC One did the show The World at War in about 1982 or something, they were very conscious that if they didn't interview these people from World War One, they would never be interviewed. I don't think anybody that fought in World War One is alive now. I don't think anybody. There's not that many people that fought in World War Two. And in fact, I was reading an article today about the hunt for the last Nazi. Is that at some point soon, the last living Nazi from the Second World War will die, because even if they were 20 in 1945, they're going to be 98 now. They're going to fall off the face of the earth. And there's a theory around history, which around history has to exist within living memory for it to really be remembered. There's a theory that once actually, about 80 years after, let's say, for example, something like the fall of Rome or Hitler or something like that, people that haven't lived through it will have forgotten it. And there won't be enough people that were alive at the time that it happened to stop it from happening again by going, look, we were there, we saw this thing really happen, and you guys need to be careful. And really interesting about history and the way in which history is viewed through the prism of time. And you can argue that, records, there's going to come a time when everybody who made a record that I own will have died. And everybody that will have seen any band that I ever liked will have died. And then you kind of go, if there's no evidence of that, did it really happen? In the way that if there's no evidence of like, for example, as I said, someone that I was intimate with died recently through suicide. And I kind of go, well, now I'm the only person that remembers any of that. and I don't know how much of that I remember anymore. Did it really happen? That's one question. I'm not sure. So, by the way, you will have noticed I have a microphone thingy on here. I am trying to see how that's working. Hopefully, my voice is a little clearer thanks to it, but maybe not. I'm not quite sure. I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me okay. Number 3 of the releases, bear in mind there are 7 soundtrack albums, which the release came out in 2014, and it was called Hyena. And Hyena is, it's another grim watch. It is, I think, again directed by Gerard Johnson, Matt's brother. This CD features 20 songs, most of which are instrumentals. There's one, Everybody Wants to Go to Heaven But Nobody Wants to Die, is a vocal, although calling it a vocal is very generous. It is largely just a hummed instrumental piece with the vocal as a texture. It features an 80-page book, again featuring photographs of London, including the Goldfinger building there. Although it's not called Goldfinger, I think it's called the Trelec Tower, but directed by the architect Goldfinger, whose name inspired the bad guy from the film Goldfinger himself. And Hyena is a film about sex trafficking, drugs, corruption, racism, the seedy underbelly of London. And sometimes I kind of wonder, well, how much money is there in these films? And if people can afford to make them, how do they afford to make them? Is it tax write-offs and investments by people that are much richer, that are quietly and altruistically funding low impact, low value, by low value, what I mean is they've got low commercial prospects, films that kind of exist and that some people never really get to see. I would say 99.9% of people on the planet have no idea this film exists, let alone that they did the soundtrack to it. Which, when you think about how many films come out and how good some of those films are, is quite a shame. We watched recently a film called Apostle, which was the film by Gareth Jones that directed The Raid and The Raid 2, which is a kind of folk horror movie set in the 1890s to 1910s with Michael Sheen. Absolutely great. It's available on Amazon for free. Hardly anybody's seen it or heard of it. And again, I kind of think about all these films that don't exist or can't be purchased or you can't own. It's very strange, actually, just how transient the very nature and the intangible nature of history and time is. This is an album, Hyena, that has a very deliberately limited soundscape. So it's made with electronic equipment, old-fashioned retro synthesizers and keyboards, going back to the electronic roots of the very early days. It's a film that's set in the London that most people don't see. As I've said, the area of poverty and deprivation. And if you look at some of the postcodes that you have inside London, some of them are some of the most deprived areas of the country, and have a poverty that's equal to somewhere like Redcar or Middlesbrough. But since they're not shown on the TV shows or TV shows about, Britain's got an amazing hotel, the Savoy, we're going to follow around some rich people, you end up kind of going, it's an invisible London that nobody really sees. And that's part of what is captured in Hyena. In 2017, there was a release of 3 albums simultaneously, called effectively the End of the Day, the Inertia Variations, and Midnight to Midnight. And there's a very expansive book version of it. Or you could do what I did, you bought 3 CDs for £12, far more affordable. The expansive book version was something like 60 quid. And the first disc on here is called The End of the Day. And these 3 discs are kind of selected highlights from the election day broadcast of 2015. So Matt had a thing called Radio Cineola, which is the name and identity of his new label, which also broadcasts occasionally radio transmissions. It did a 24-hour broadcast. It also puts out podcasts. You can download the full 24 hours of the election day 2015 coverage, from which this is a 3 hours of selected excerpts of effectively the best of. Disc 1, The End of the Day, is a sequel to 2000's Interpretations EP. It doesn't feature the on every song, by the way. There is one new the original track, We Can't Stop What's Coming, which is on here. Everything else has a selection of the alumni, invited guests, and similar. James Eller, bass player in the between 1989 and 1993, and also 2018 to now, plays on almost every track on here. It is a series of cover versions, including Bugle Boy by Colin Lloyd Tucker, who I think is in Wire, and obviously We Can't Stop What's Coming, a new track by the written and inspired by the death of Matt's brother, Andy Johnson, who did the artwork for a lot of the albums. That's CD one, and it's strange actually to make a triple album out of effectively one new song, but the other have managed to do it. The second one that we have here is the Inertia Variations, the spoken word soundtrack to the documentary of the same name that was available in 2018. I would love to see the Inertia Variations because it's a documentary that follows Matt Johnson as he tries to write new material, generally failing, and features Matt narrating John Tottenham's epic poetic cycle on the subject of work avoidance, which is what effectively creatively has happened between 2002 and 2018. Failure, procrastination, and the wasting of time. The days and nights are where we live, wondering who we are, where we came from, and where we are going. Is it good? I've tried to be very, very complimentary about this. I think it's a meditation on wasting time. Now, there's something to be said for the point of view, which is, well, sometimes people mistake saying something for having something worth saying. And sometimes there's the element of, if let's say you're somebody that works 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, and then you suddenly think, well, why haven't you released a new album of songs in 23 years? And you kind of go, you're just lazy, you know. I wouldn't be able to get away with having 23 years off. And you end up I'm not vastly sympathetic to artists that don't release new material or don't play live. It's like, well, what are you doing? You're sitting around goofing off, eating crisps and not doing anything, right? But then, as the opening line says, you would think by now that people would know better than to ask what I've been doing with my time, because the answer is embarrassing and not very much, which is probably not what I should be saying. But sometimes you think about how fiercely unprolific artists are. Let's say Metallica aren't vastly prolific with their album releases, but at the very least, they play live fairly regularly. You know, it's not as if they've been sitting around not doing anything. I've just been touring, like the Sisters of Mercy, for example. Whereas the Inertia Variations is, for me, it's a little baffling to make. Right, so I'm going to release, my first new album, which is regarded as a new The album in 17 years. One of the part, and a third of it is going to be about me telling people I've done nothing with my time in the Inertia Variations. And you can't even watch the fucking documentary because it's not available. Try and find it on streaming. I haven't been able to, unless it's been added very recently. And it's just like, really, again, history kind of falling out of the popular eye and not being fully, I think, not being fully kind of grasped, really, is to go, well, actually, again, if there's no records, did the history really happen? And sometimes, as we know, artists are silent because they've got nothing to say, or sometimes because they're terrified of whatever they do not being quite as good as what they've done before. Disc 3 of the trilogy, effectively the sixth Cineola album, came out in 2017, same day as the others. And it's called Midnight to Midnight. It's a journey through the night and around the globe via the shortwaves of Radio Cineola. The 24-hour broadcast on the election day of 2015 featured interviews with people like William Endgall, Zoe Hepton, David Edwards. You can tell I'm reading off the back of this. Abdi Asadi, Lucinda Rogers, David Edwards. Again, I've mentioned Marion St. Laurent, Neil Clark, Neil Sanders, depending on how you pronounce it. And it's a combination of excerpts from their interviews, plus instrumental material by Matt. And this is where I think perhaps it's more political than anything that Matt has done recently. His work has veered towards questioning absolutely everything indiscriminately. And sometimes questioning everything is as dangerous as questioning nothing, because what both sides shows that you've got no necessary, you're not demonstrating any ability to cut the wheat from the chaff here. If you question everything, that's the same as blindly accepting everything, and you have to be really careful around that, because you end up kind of questioning: is gravity real? Is my cat real? Do donuts exist? That type of stuff. What time is love? Those kind of questions. The political content of Midnight to Midnight could be alienating to some people. It's quite strong. It's quite to the edges of the accepted political discovery and discourse. It's very obvious though, and then I'm kind of asking, well, what's the purpose of this? Is it to communicate an idea? Is it to communicate skepticism? What are you trying to communicate here? Because the purpose of an artist, in my opinion, is to communicate ideas, thoughts, and concepts. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can do that through communicating with people on an emotional level. You can do that with communicating on people through a political level with a small p. You can do that through communicating ideas. Or sometimes you just got to go, well, rhythm is a dancer, and just go for it. And everybody dance now. That in itself is a political angle. You can kind of go, well, art and is the rebellion joy as an act of resistance, for example. This isn't particularly joyful. It's more a bit doom and gloom, a bit everything's fucked and we're all going to die. And you kind of go, well, is that accurate? Because obviously at the time it came out, 2017, post the Brexit vote, Trump was president. We didn't know COVID was about to happen. We didn't know Boris Johnson was about to become Prime Minister. And you can kind of go, oh, it could get worse, couldn't it? And it's like we looked at the history of mankind, and it went, it can't get any worse. And like 2020 went, hold my beer, watch this. And there we are. So I don't have a particularly vastly high opinion of Trilogy, because it feels a little bit like squandering an opportunity. It was very, very clear, both from the anticipation that surrounded the release of the Inertia Variations and the Trilogy CDs, and the announcement in late 2017 that they were going to go back on tour for the first time in 18 years, is that there was a lot of goodwill. People wanted to know what had been happening. It's not that we've been waiting patiently. We'd got on with our lives. We'd quite like to see what the band have been doing and what they've been up to and who's in the band and what's happening next. But at the same point, we're kind of going, you've really got one opportunity to show us how good you are. And this wasn't really, I think, what people wanted. People wanted, I say people, well, I say me, I wanted a song-based album that spoke to what it was to be alive in the year 2017, 2018, to tell me, well, this is where we are and where we've been and what's happened over the past 17 years. These are our thoughts, these are our ideas, these are the things we've seen upon the way. And kind of, just checking, because I always think that, and I hate nostalgia, I really, really do. And you might not think it, given that I talk about a lot of very old songs on these videos. But what I wanted was I want to know, well, in the way that the song spoke to me when I was 17 or 27 or 37, I wanted the songs to go, right, now that you're 44, 45, 47, this is what we found on the way. This is how to navigate your way through getting older and becoming tired and bold. Teenage Angst has paid off well, and now I'm tired and I'm bored and old, as the song went. Which, surprisingly, In Utero's 30 years old this year. I can't believe that. Maybe I should do some videos about Nirvana at some point. Maybe not. Who knows? But the trilogy, I think, had a lot of goodwill and a lot of interest and a lot of attention to it, and it just didn't stick the landing. We were hoping for something, and what we got wasn't quite it. We did get the single. So before the release of Trilogy, 2017's Record Store Day, we got the first new physical the single in 17 years. We Can't Stop What's Coming. A single-sided 7-inch that was repressed. I think this is the black vinyl second version of it. Chris Whitten on drums there, James on bass, Ian Berryman on keyboards. I'm not sure who Chris Whitten is, with Johnny Marr on guitar actually, and Zeke Manuka on percussion. So We Can't Stop What's Coming was a new The single, and I'm not going to lie, very, very tightly anticipated. And I think the single, perhaps they underestimated the degree of interest that people would have had in new The material. But then we heard some of it, and perhaps we weren't quite as impressed as we thought we might have been. 2017 then, that was Trilogy, and the band announced their comeback tour, which had a number of releases. The first show to go on sale was at the Royal Albert Hall, which was due to take place on the 5th of July 2018. It got released as a Blu Ray, as a CD. There was a super duper vinyl set with a radio session. It was about £150. I didn't buy that. And instead what we got was Tim Pope directing the film and the band recording the live set. So the band, I would hesitate to say reformed because they never officially split up, but a new configuration of the band came into existence. Matt Johnson on vocals, James Eller on bass, Barry Cadigan, known as Little Barry, who'd also played and been recommended by Johnny Marr to Matt Johnson. He played with Morrissey in 2004. And on drums, Earl Harvin from the Naked Self tour. Earl is an incredible drummer, by the way. I think he's absolutely fantastic, one of the best drummers I've ever seen. And DC Collard, who played on the Mind Bomb and Dusk period of the band on keyboards, creating a new version of the group, presenting the songs, not using samples or reproductions or anything, but creating them with a more kind of organic way. We also got a live concert film, The Live at the Royal Albert Hall, the comeback special, which features the set list there. And the Albert Hall show sold out very, very quickly indeed. We had the good fortune, David and I, had the good fortune to see the show at the Royal Albert Hall, but I got to tell you, I was really pissed off at the prices. Ticket price for the at the Royal Albert Hall, £125. Jesus Christ. Now, I could justify that because I hadn't spent any substantial money on the for a decade and a half. Good God, £125 was a lot of money, especially when about half an hour later the Brixton show went on sale, was £50. I was like, really? Oh, I could have gone to Brixton and saved myself 75 quid. But I got to see the show that was on the DVD, which I guess counts for something, right? Because that's going to be when you think about what's a major show that a band has played. You know, The at the Albert Hall in 2018, that's probably going to be regarded as the show. The Cure at Hyde Park in 2018, that's probably going to be regarded as one of the high points of the band's career. Pink Floyd at Live Aid, Hyde Park, again, pretty much every time I go to see a band in London, actually, come to think of it. You kind of get that's it. That's the show. I really enjoyed this show at the Albert Hall and at Brixton Academy, although I thought the audience at Brixton Academy was a bunch of rude melon farmers. They could not keep quiet. And when Matt was there singing Love is Stronger Than Death, probably about 30 feet over that way, a fight kicked off because some drunk dudes just wouldn't shut the hell up. And it was annoying. I later saw some guy tweet, "Oh, it was just Matt and acoustic guitar, it was boring," and somebody started to start a fight with me, and I'm going, "You're the guy that pissed off everybody in the room." Because when Matt is singing Love is Stronger Than Death, there's loads of us that are there going, "That's a song I want played at my funeral," and you're braying about it into your lager. Because, "Oh, look at me, I'm seeing the at the Brixton Academy, ha ha ha, shut the fuck up, the band are playing." When did people lose their manners? I don't know. I really don't know. 2018 saw the comeback tour, which I think wound up eventually in Australia, hence the tour t-shirt. There was also a one-off appearance by Matt with former bandmate Johnny Marr, captured on the Live at the Roundhouse Comet Tripper set. And this features a cover version, Johnny and Matt performing Summer in the City. I don't know who wrote Summer in the City. I don't particularly care who wrote Summer in the City. Hot Time, Summer in the City, etc., etc. It was released as a download single because they recorded the soundtrack. The live version of it is on the live at the Roundhouse Comic Tripper double CD. Really good, really like it, really enjoyed it. Very good indeed. Very glad that I bought the CD, like the fool that I am. Then it went a little bit quiet, 2019, whilst Matt worked his way through preparing and editing the comeback special, which was released in 2021. 2019 saw the release of not very much, to be honest. 2020 saw the release of the soundtrack album, the last of the studio album to date, Muscle. It's a film again by, I think, Gerard Johnson, this time around self-image, gyms, weightlifting, revisiting the old-fashioned version of London that you don't get to see very much. As a film, it's around masculinity, identity, self-actualization, bodybuilding, self-perception around what it is to be a man, that type of thing. I haven't seen it. Like a lot of these films, you hardly ever get a chance to see them, and they're difficult to find, and they're even more difficult to keep, I think it's fair to say. It's again another mostly instrumental album of material. You can clearly tell it's Matt Johnson, but at the same point, it's not. It doesn't stand out as being a song based the release. It has the second official the song to be released. Well, technically third, I think. I Want to Be You. And I Want to Be You was released as a 7-inch single in advance. Record Store Day again. Here it is. I Want to Be You. Backed with Velvet Muscle Scream, which is an instrumental artwork by Andy Dogg. And I think it's fair to say I Want to Be You is deliberately designed to recapture the sense and hair of This Is the Day. It uses the same, I think, was it a Hammond organ or something? I don't even know what it is. The same organ which is used on This Is the Day. And so it sounds just like This Is the Day, but 40 years later. The soundtrack album, I listened to it today. It's not amazing. It's a lot of instrumental, the material. The last track, Want You to Be One, is awful because it's basically I Want to Be You, but done in a comedy, sped up, slowed down, kind of fussed and mucked about with form that sounds like it would be the soundtrack to a gag reel on a DVD. Not a fan, I think it's fair to say. At the same time, around about 2019, 2020, we had the release of the Cineola Miscellany, is what it's called, which features one song from each of the soundtrack albums to date. So that is The Lust for Unsung Dreams from Tony, The Evening Star from Moonbug, Everybody Wants to Go to Heaven and Nobody Wants to Die from Hyena, The Late Station from Midnight to Midnight, and then two previously unreleased songs. One, Sunset in the City, which it says is due to come from the forthcoming album Odin, that hasn't come out 3.5 years later, and The Changing Colours of the Sky from the forthcoming soundtrack album Helios, which again hasn't come out 3.5 years later. So I'm not quite sure exactly how much other soundtrack material there is that is just sitting around on a hard drive somewhere in London that I will almost definitely never get to see. We got the comeback special was released. Here is the DVD, and here is, well, that's the Blu Ray actually, and here is the CD edition of it in the book packs. As I was showing you earlier, that came out in late 2021. And since then, the past 2 years have seen one release, the single $1, One Vote, backed with Mrs. Mac from 2007 on the B side of the 7-inch. And $1, One Vote kind of fully leans into the political angles of Matt's philosophy. It's pretty clear from reading the lyrics that Matt is extremely sceptical about everything that's on the BBC and everything that's published by anybody, and that perhaps there's a vast, huge global conspiracy which exists to subjugate the masses and probably repress the free thinkers. It's difficult to take that degree of skepticism fully seriously. I've worked on enough government projects to know they can't organise a principal in a brewery. The idea of there being one vast, hugely orchestrated, thousands of people strong conspiracy is so unlikely to be improbable as it is practically impossible in every way. And some of the lyrics in here are perhaps, I think, bordering on the edge of COVID denialism, to suggest that COVID doesn't exist, or that or diseases are deliberately uncured because it's more profitable to exploit the sick than it is to cure things like cancer. It's a it takes a lot of the political themes that were laid down by Matt previously and extrapolates them out to the umpteenth degree, to the point where I'm not sure I fully agree with all of the lyrics that are in the song. But it's an interesting song. It's got fantastic instrumentation. Sounds just like it sounds like the of Dogs of Lust and of Infected. Not, thank God, the of Naked Self, which is not my favourite period at all. The band. That brings us up to late 2023, the here, the now, September the 26th, and apparently the other are working on a new studio album. There are plans for touring in coming years. I look forward to that when that happens. I intend to be there when it does happen, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't. We've still got lots of records, lots of soundtrack albums. I'm really glad we had this late period resurgence of even though we haven't had a full and formal song-based album. We've had 7 instrumental soundtrack albums, plus the concert release of the Royal Albert Hall, which is, if you'd have said to me 12 years ago, that's what's going to happen in the next 12 years for that sounds pretty good, and it has been pretty good. I'm not going to pretend it hasn't. I'm really glad we had an opportunity to see a modern version of the band, and that the reclaimed, I think, from memory and history, a little bit their own identity and their own agency. Sometimes when a band's not around, it's easy to forget how loved the band are and how much the band mean to people. But with Thother, they are, despite having the most ungoogleable name out of any band on the planet, the past few years have felt like an Indian summer for the group, and I'm really glad that we've had it. And that's where I'm going to wrap up. So, new kit, new light, woo! Try to do it with a microphone, see how that works. Hopefully everything's been okay. You can hear me nice and loud and clear, and hopefully I look stunningly handsome, which makes a nice change. But hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, please subscribe. If you haven't, don't tell anybody. It's probably for the best. I can't make every single one of these absolutely fascinating for absolutely everybody. You're not going to be interested in some of the bands I like. I totally get it. World's a big place. It would be boring if we all like the same things. Although some of the things I would like everybody to like, peace, equality, cuddles, chocolate donuts. And now, talking of which, hopefully, when I get downstairs, there might be a chocolate donut that I can eat. If there isn't, I'm sure I can think of something. Take care of yourselves and each other. And in the words of the immortal Alan Fluff Freeman, if you love somebody, don't forget to tell them before it's too late. Okay, see you later. Bye.